Are you the one sending the Among Us?
Good evening, and thank you for coming. We're excited to have you all here tonight. I'm Sue Lyon, the Vice Provost here at Simon's Rock, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Founders Day lecture. Today actually marks the day that would have been our founder, Betty Hall's 113th birthday, and we're delighted to have you here with us tonight. I also have the privilege of welcoming back to campus this evening Allison Sproul, a member of our Board of Overseers and a Simon's Rock alum. Allison entered the college in 2001 and graduated with a BA in 2005 before pursuing graduate work and earning a PhD at the University of Washington. She currently serves as a principal investigator at the Howard Hughes Memorial Medical Institute, where her work focuses on 4D cellular physiology and computation theory. Prior to working at Howard Hughes, she held academic positions at Boston University, Princeton, and the University of Washington. Please join me in welcoming Allison this evening.
It's a great pleasure to be here tonight and hope to introduce you to this evening's featured speaker and who will be having a discussion with later, Joan Countryman. Joan has a long history in education. She's worked as a teacher for over 23 years in mathematics, and also at an intersection very much cares about how writing can be a lens on how we see the world, particularly mathematics, and has published a book in this area. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think as a Simon's Rocker, all of us can connect with how writing is an important lens for understanding different topics. And so I just wanted to share that with you and have you think about her as a fellow person who sees the world through writing as you hear about her views of education. Just sort of also give you a little bit of her path, which I know she'll be sharing more with you today. She grew up in Philadelphia and was the first African-American graduate of the Germantown Friends School, where she actually had sort of first run in with things that was later connected to Simon's Rock, which I think she will also expand on. She's also, like many people here, a graduate of the Great Liberal Arts School. In this case, she received her BA from Sir and Lawrence College, before moving on to get a master's at Yale University and studying at the London School of Economics as a Fulbright Scholar. As I mentioned, she was a mathematics teacher for 23 years at her alma mater, the Germantown Friends School. And after retiring from there, she moved on to be a head of the Lincoln School in Providence, Rhode Island. Following retirement, she's had a number of different positions that include being consultant and founding head of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa, led the Adolescent Girls School. She also currently chairs and serves as the board of the Friends City Center Philadelphia Retirement Committee, has served on the board of managers for Haverford College, has been the president of the corporation. She's an honorary member of the board of trustees at Sarah and Lawrence College, a former member of our own board of overseers at Simon's Rock, and have had a number of other board positions. But again, please help me welcome Joan Countryman to talk to us tonight and give us some perspective on will the house always need an overhaul, in reference to Betty Hall's great essay on will the house on our great house education.
Thank you, Allison. You know, it's always interesting to come back, and I didn't realize. First of all, I didn't realize it would be so cold, and but I didn't realize that as soon as I got on the campus, I knew I could feel where I was, and that's always a good sign. I'm honored to join Bard and Bard Academy and Bard College at Simon's Rock on this Founders Day, November 16th, to celebrate Betty Hall, her birthday, and her work, which challenged educators to rethink not only the path to college and the timing, but also the nature of the destination. I'm going to tell you this evening a bit about my path into education and try to make a connection with what some of the lessons I've learned for a much wider world. In my case, the path in education which eventually led to college, teaching, and leading, had a few detours. I was born in 1940, which is a friendly number, by the way. In math class, my students knew, because 1940 is so friendly, how to figure out my age. Which some of you have done too, I'm sure. My earliest memories of that time, however, in Philadelphia were during World War II, which is part of the reason I told you when I was born. That means I grew up knowing words like ration books, pre-war, post-war, seeing men in uniform. In 1948, in second grade, with my best friend, she and I were in the top reading group, and we made the mistake of telling the teacher that we had read ahead in the reader. Since we had finished the book, and the books on the storage closet shelves were dusty, the teacher said she'd give us a few cloths and have us clean the books in the closet while the other children finished the day's lesson. You can imagine what my parents thought of that. Within days, I was enrolled in another school, and within a few months, I was enrolled in Germantown Friends School, a Quaker school where I spent most of the 1950s. When I was 14, in 1954, when the Supreme Court ruled that separating children in public schools on the basis of race was unconstitutional, that is the decision Brown versus Board of Education, my mother had me sit with her and watch on television that news. 16 months later, in August 1955, Emmett Till was abducted, tortured, and lynched in Mississippi. He was 14. I was 15. In 1957, the Little Rock Nine, as they were called, enrolled in formerly all-white Little Rock Central High School. And then Dwight Eisenhower had to send federal troops to escort them into school after Orville Clovis sent the Arkansas National Guard to block their entry. The Supreme Court had issued a second ruling in 1955 ordering school districts to integrate with all deliberate speed. And then in 1960, Greensboro, North Carolina African American students staged a sit-in at a Woolworth's luncheon counter and refused to leave when denied service. The sit-in movement soon spread across the South, and then with students all over the country supporting nonviolent protests against segregation. By then, a student at Sarah Lawrence College, I considered myself a change agent looking to protest social injustice and to fight for civil rights. I spent much of the summer of 1963 preparing for the August March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, attended by 250,000 people. So what you can hear in that is a life influenced by my parents and their concern for education, by the Great Migration, which led people like my parents who were born in the South, in Virginia and North Carolina, but who, as adults, moved north looking for a better life and better work. and also in addition, my social justice concerns were developed at the dinner table, if you will. The focus was on education. Mind you, I grew up thinking that the two places in the world I would never imagine visiting were Mississippi and South Africa. Now, in 1963, Betty Hall, as you know from the earlier slides, had decided on leaving Concord Academy and founding a new school, an early college, now called, and she called Simon's Rock. I have a family connection with Concord Academy, so I looked online to see what it said about its former heads. And here's a paragraph describing her at Concord Academy. Over time, Mrs. Hall would become something of a legend, famous for her ability to drive a tractor, whistle through her teeth, pitch a baseball game, and live her belief that one should just do it. Her irrepressible personality set the tone for a lively campus where students were expected to engage fully and actively in and out of the classroom. And you know, then the House of Education needs an overhaul. She made a case, which is there on the slide, about changing the way we did higher education, no longer wasting the time and talents of young people. Google is an amazing thing, and you can stumble upon little tidbits that you don't expect. For example, I discovered that my friend Bernard Lafayette spoke here at the Du Bois Memorial Lecture a few years, not too many years ago. And he recalled that Martin Luther King entered college at 15 because he saw no reason to wait. It turns out my own father, William Kennedy, entered Howard University in 1929 when he was 15 and took a degree in electrical engineering in 1933. Yet he was not, he received his degree in June 1933. He was not yet 20. Education in our family is the family business. My father was a teacher, the first African-American high school teacher in the Philadelphia public schools. My sister, a sociologist, is a retired university professor. My son and his wife are tenured professors. My daughter and her husband are independent school teachers and administrators. And my first grandchild teaches history in an independent school in Rhode Island. And this year, I also learned that both my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side had been teachers in North Carolina. He later became a lawyer, which is a puzzle I have not resolved yet, but I knew him and I knew he was a lawyer. And she, his wife, raised 8 or 9 children, my father, one of the youngest. That grandmother died in 1919 during what was then called the Spanish flu pandemic. And I just offer that as an example of something that I didn't really understand until the last 2-3 years that we've been through, what the impact of both that pandemic and on our family. Now, John Dewey spent his life focusing on reforming public education he said, to reconstruct American democracy and increase political participation. I'm bringing him up because he is, in fact, behind a lot of the thinking of schools like Sarah Lawrence College, where I was an undergraduate, like many independent schools and many public schools as well, where teachers, at best, it seems to me, see education as life, not just preparation, who try to help students understand that failing can be instructive, it's not a disaster, that we are in constant, continuous formation, and as John Dewey said in lots of different ways, democracy and education go together. I want to remind you of a wonderful piece from Through the Looking Glass. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master? That's all. Now I tell you that because I want to talk about the experience I had in first agreeing to advise the formation of a school in South Africa, and then experience living in South Africa, one of the places that I said I would never visit. Actually, when I retired in 2005 from being head of Lincoln School. I then had to practice retirement, so I took on 2 other schools, one of which was at the invitation of Oprah Winfrey. Here are some pictures of schools that I visited in South Africa. The first time I was there was 2002, and we visited independent kindergartens. We visited primary and secondary schools, both government and independent. And we also did some touring. So, for example, the man with the red hat was one of the guides in Robben Island, the prison where Nelson Mandela was held for so many years. It turns out that guide was arrested when he was 16 for protest and was there for about 16 years at the same time as Nelson Mandela. Here are some thoughts I have about living in a country with 11 official languages, which is part of the reason that I recited the Humpty Dumpty poem about words. South Africa has 11 official languages. That means that if you ask for something like a copy of their constitution, you will get it in 11 official languages. We discovered when we asked for that. Here are some thoughts I have about living in such a place. You stop assuming that you understand what people are saying. Even if everyone is speaking English, you can't assume that you understand what people are saying. Words mean different things. Here, some schools are called colleges, that is in South Africa, and colleges are called schools. In colleges, schools, the students are called learners. In schools, colleges or universities, they are called students. Many Black South Africans speak more than one language at a time. That is, a sentence might start in English, then move to Zulu and finish in Sesotho. It takes getting used to, but soon you enjoy trying to figure out if you understand what someone just said. For example, I remember that I was confused when I was invited to a wine tasting and the host said, "It's 7 for 7:30. Can you guess what she was saying? Well, I had to ask, but tonight when someone else said dinner was 6:30 for 7, I knew exactly what that meant in South Africa. Now, what I mostly learned in South Africa was something that has essentially shaped my thinking about education for the last 20 years. And that is also what I learned about living in a democracy. I want to tell you first about a little bit about the experience of helping the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy get started, and then spending a few months as the founding head. One of the things we did was interview the 7th and 8th, I guess there were 6th and 7th grade girls who were applying for the school. The school was started because with the new regime, at once the apartheid regime was taken away, and there was a new South Africa with Nelson Mandela as the first president. The idea was they needed to encourage families to send their daughters to high school. In many families, if you couldn't afford education for everybody in the family, you send the boys to school, but not the girls. So the idea was, and it seems to be working quite well, as a matter of fact, that if you provide opportunities for education to everybody, and particularly to girls who hadn't had it at all, they could qualify and go on in South Africa to university. So in any case, we were interviewing the girls who were in 6th and 7th grade to see if they wanted to come to the school. The two interviews that I remember best, one was a 6th grader who was very excited about the possibility of coming to this school. And we said, do you understand it's a boarding school and you won't be able to go home every day or every week, or you may not see your family very many times all over the whole year? And she said, I've been with my family all my life. It's time to move on. The second interview was with a 7th grader who said, when we asked her, why do you want to come to this school? Why do you want to go on in school? And she said, it's my tomorrow. Now, the argument I want to make is that, in fact, education is the tomorrow that we can provide for every child, and that in fact, if we don't provide that education, we will not have our democracy. So I think I'd like to stop there and just ask you to think about the title of this talk. Will it always need an overhaul? And you can imagine, you can guess what my answer is. Questions?
So just so you know, an idea of the format, we'll take questions from the audience. We also will be lucky enough to hear in person. There are many of you on Zoom who are listening, and so we'll have someone who will be letting you know their Zoom questions, and I'll be repeating them, both the questions here in the room and the questions from Zoom here into the mic, just so that everybody can hear regardless of where you are joining us from today. Let's start with questions here in the room. Everyone needs a moment. I can go ahead and actually start the question. Just something I was really struck by, we often think about the role of liberal arts education to prepare people to be critical thinkers. I think often we think of being a part of a great democracy. We spoke about civil rights movements here and abroad. Oftentimes the part of that is being also a great communicator. What do you think the role of liberal education is in terms of training us to be a communicator, not just a great thinker?
Well, my little poem about words gives you a sense of how important I think that is. I'd like to go back to Betty Hall and say, just do it. Is probably advice we should all give each other, whether it's whether we should stand up and speak or write or disagree. There are many opportunities for us not to just sit back and let whatever it is, something that bothers us go by because we're afraid to present an alternative view. But it is a matter of practice, and I think one of the best things we can do in schools is give each other practice to express ourselves in many ways. In words, I'm a math person, so I think in patterns and numbers and questions that we can ask in all of the disciplines. In the arts, yes, if you look back on movements of change in this country, think about how much music and art, as well as speaking, has played an important role.
Hi. I wonder if you could speak to, within the kind of spectrum of advancing the liberal arts education, advancing the liberal arts question, where do you see the role of schools like Simon's Rock and these kind of institutions which are small and lacking in resources, but still provide a really interesting example of what we can do? Where do you see that?
Well, if there weren't schools like, well, first of all, there aren't many schools like Simon's Rock, but what Simon's Rock has done, and what those of you who are students here are doing, is demonstrating the impact of this kind of learning. And take my father, for example. My father was trained to be an electrical engineer as an undergraduate in a college. But it was clear that one of the things he used to say to my sister and me was, learn how to write. That's the most important thing. If you're an engineer and you can't write, nobody will listen to you, nobody will believe you. And that is part of why my sense about education, about higher education is that liberal arts are critical, that the humanities in particular, although I have been was when I was a teacher, part of an organization called Mathematics as a humanistic discipline, but it's because I think the intersection of all of these disciplines is what brings about the kind of learning and change and improvement that we're looking to have.
What is the role into pre-college education planning in the future?
The question is about what the role of pre-college education and planning in the future.
If it happens, I would be so relieved. Because we are in this country in a situation where the barriers to college have to do with money, and not only money, but that is the major barrier, and it's the assumption that one can only go to college if she or he has access to some kind of funding. So the alternative is to provide education, and certainly it's doable, and in some places it is done. We just have to figure out how. And the challenge that I see is that unless we do figure out a way, and I'm actually, when I talk about education, I really have in my mind both early childhood education and advanced studies in very esoteric things. I think that with excellence, you can, in fact, have a democracy. Without it, you know what can happen. We can see the direction that it can go. And it's, I think it was the reason it was so clear to me in South Africa that democracy and education were intertwined in ways that are so important that we should make sure that in our country that people have access to it. The reason it was so clear was during apartheid, they had four different kinds of education, and it was racially divided. If you were a white South African, you had access to the best schools. If you were a black South African, you had very little access to any schools. But there were also Asian South Africans, who had a different route, and colored, who were not, and colored there means something slightly different from what it meant here. In particular, one particular ethnic group who settled in that country I forget what century, certainly long before the 18th century. And this notion is that you only provide for people because they're in a particular group, which we are doing in some way here, is getting in the way. So it's certainly something that I think we probably could do a much better job of in this country than we do. There's one in the back there. Right here?
Yeah, so I would assume that since you said that there was like a different way of speaking in South Africa, I would also assume that students over there were a little bit more different than students over here. So like, do you mind sharing some like comparisons or just contrast or just things that are just different over there that you think that would probably be better over here? Just like, how is it just in general, just being able to like take in like just how kids probably studied over there, or just even communicated with each other and with their teachers compared to how they do it like, you know, in schools in America. So yeah.
The question centers on some of the communication differences that were spoken about in the talk between South African students and students here. What are lessons that we need to take education here in America?
No, I'm not sure that I can characterize it was the commitment to education that I picked up in South Africa, the insight that schools are the way to help the society develop, grow, support people, make a better life for everybody, that sense. The way that the example for me with the languages was often, well, here's an example. We asked girls questions like, and I'm talking about girls because this is a girls' school, but we asked these young kids, what's your favorite subject? What do you like? Or what are your strengths? And one little girl said, well, excuse me, my best strength is netball. Do you know what netball is? Well, I didn't either. But people in the southern hemisphere, it's a game. It looks like a little bit like a cross between basketball and volleyball, and it's very popular. And I know in Australia, because I've seen it played there, and also in South Africa. And anyway, this child said that she was really good at netball. And after a while, we said, well, what about your weaknesses? Is there anything you're not so good at school? And she thought for a minute, and then she said, I'm not so good in languages. Now, the person I was paired with who should do the interviewing, who was South African, was ready to go on, but I said, well, excuse me, how many languages do you speak? And she said, 4. And I said, you know what, in my country, if you said you spoke 4 languages, you could not say you're not so good in language. So yes, we do have different ways of perceiving these things, but for me, the expectation that, one, better schools will help this country, and we can do it, is what's missing sometimes here. And what I long for us to do is really have confidence that it is education that will make a difference.
Given your experience in teaching, what are some things that the average person can do to contribute to the education of our next generation?
The question was given out in experience in teaching, what are things the average person can do to contribute to the education of the next generation?
Well, the things that come to mind, you might say, well, that's not average. I'm not sure what average is, except that if you believe that people can learn things, then that's a step in the right direction. I was just saying earlier that because I'm a math teacher, I've noticed that when I say I'm a math teacher, people adult people who hated math or were afraid of it or thought they couldn't do it would sometimes walk away. They don't want to, they're scared to talk to me because I was a math teacher. And then I started writing poems, and if I say I'm a poet, sometimes the same thing. So people perceive certain things as too hard or too different, too boring. I don't know what it is. But what the difference for me and the way in which, for example, my children who are teachers teach is with the expectation that you can do it. So we're trying to invite people in rather than push them out. And as a math person, I would say that the mistake that is sometimes made in teaching mathematics is making students think that only special minds can understand this, when in fact, we can all understand wonderful and extraordinary and beautiful ideas that mathematics offers us, and we don't have to be superstars to understand them.
I feel a lot this idea that you don't have to be extraordinary to really understand any topic, and we've asked it before that we have to teach something out of the calls that teaching is so important.
Exactly that. I would say that, for example, in the classroom, having students work together and talk to each other and wrestle together with problems is a way of saying, you know, we all can own these questions, and we can all think about ways that we can develop new questions that might and will in fact provide insights that will solve sometimes very difficult problems.
So the question is asking, I'm sure that we're going to be to college at the age of 15 and when we come and experience here that many of us go to college over special circumstances. We share that should go forward for everybody. How do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think it certainly should be available and an option for everybody. On the other hand, I'll tell you, Betty Hall went to Radcliffe College. She stopped going her undergraduate studies after 1 year, and then years later, as a married adult, I think she was, I don't know, I've forgotten what age she was, but actually, one of the reasons I picked up on this is that Sarah Lawrence College, when I was there, designed a program for women who wanted to come back and finish their degrees. They had gotten married or for various reasons had not completed their undergraduate study. So here's a population, not of 15-year-olds, but maybe 40-year-olds for whom going to college was an opportunity they had not had, and suddenly were able to do it. And I think that's the program that she was able to enroll in at Radcliffe. My concern is that at every level, and I'll tell you a story about my child. My son, we were living in London when he was 3 and 4, and he went to a wonderful early childhood program. When we came back to the United States, I thought, I think he needs to be in school of some kind, and he was too young for the kindergartens that were available to him. So I looked around, and one school had a pre-kindergarten that he could do, and they said they would enroll him. So he was very excited to go to school, and he and I went, he enrolled. And he went the first day, and then he came home on a little bus. He got off the bus, and he and I were walking to our apartment house. I said, "How was school?" And he said, "I'm not going back there. It's a stupid school." And the short version of the story is that I went with him another day, and he was right. It was a stupid school. without going into details about what was stupid about it, my point is that even a 4-year-old can perceive whether the expectation is that I can grow here and learn something, or that I must only focus on the rules. And that was one of the things he picked up on, was that when they had show and tell, the children had to sit up straight on the rug and not move. He was so involved with his child's show and tell that and eventually more and more children were engaging with the speaker, who was also a 4-year-old. And what my son perceived, he certainly didn't articulate, but what he perceived is, that's not how you should be in school. We should be excited and engaged and invited in. So yes, there are, I celebrate the opportunity that you have here to start when you're ready to do what we call college work. And I also celebrate the opportunity for younger people to be challenged in different ways in school, and also for older people to go back, if you will, and try something new.
It's also a business, but how do you think that schools can do that without engaging anybody? General lessons.
Talking about it, talking, and having these kinds of conversations, trying to really think about what it is we're trying to do here. I get worried about the testing as the way to figure out whether somebody's prepared for the next step. It's not clear that is the right way to engage in learning. We're thinking about what learning is. There's another question I think.
Yeah, also going back to what I asked earlier, I remember you did say that people felt like, especially most kids felt like their work or academics would lead to the benefit of their societies. But do you believe that what differs them from us is that in America, that there's no social pressure to produce any learners? Do you think that social pressure does, from the society itself, produces more learners, or just more avid, readers, or people who just take their school a little bit more serious because they feel like they actually benefit from doing that and they actually help the bigger cause?
That's a very interesting question, because I did feel that in South Africa, the idea that they were going to, it's called, it has the word leadership in it, and it's commitment to the community was part of the purpose of education. In other words, I'm preparing so that I can help my community grow. And certainly there are lots of people who profess that here as well and are committed to saying, we're getting opportunities, so lots of schools have all sorts of programs. And that's what I'm hoping, that we could just expand as much as possible, and open, for example, open college to everyone. Just even the small attempts to do that have been very successful if we were willing to pay for it and do it. And the commitment, it seems to me, the payoff will be the opposite of the disaster that I see ahead if we don't commit to this kind of development.
So we have one last question from one of our webinar participants. They would like to know, it is believed that many liberal arts colleges will close due to financial challenges. How would you convince the populace that such education is worth the investment?
So the question is about how many liberal arts colleges are facing strong financial times and might close. How would we convince people to value it?
Unfortunately, there is a history of the loss of schools, particularly colleges, because of the financial issue, the dependence on enrollment and particularly for those who are in less populated areas and so forth is challenging. On the other hand, the more we talk about the purpose of education and the more we entertain the possibility that, let's say, public education through college was available to everyone, it seems to me the more likely we can move in a better direction, and that's what I would hope for. We could stop being a country where, I'm going to get my politics here, where you could run for office and not have read anything about the history of the country. That seems to me appalling.
With that, since we have a proceeding to stay in since the third time.
Allison and Joan for a wonderful evening, and thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our Founders Day. Have a great night.
Thank you.